Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. A prominent economist is issuing a dire warning about the future of our nation. We are pleased to welcome back to Newsmax TV Professor Thomas Sowell, a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He joins us now from California to talk about his brand new book called Dismantling America. Welcome back to Newsmax TV, Professor.
Good being back.
The book is a compilation of your essays on a wide range of issues, and they seem to have a common theme of the decline of American values and institutions. So I'd like to ask you a question you once reportedly asked the Nobel economist Friedrich Hayek. Are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future?
Pessimistic, much more so than when I asked that question of Hayek many years ago. Part of it is due to the continuation of a long set of trends. But much of it is also due to the fact that the current administration is really escalating these trends that are going in the wrong direction. One of those trends is the notion that there's some elite out there who ought to be taking decisions out of our hands and concentrating them in the hands of government politicians, bureaucrats, and judges. That's the big domestic problem. The huge international problem is the problem of our doing nothing while Iran is developing nuclear weapons, given that Iran is the largest sponsor of international terrorism in the world.
Now, you write that there are people who are deliberately dismantling this country's values, laws, history, and traditions. You talked briefly about the current administration, but in general, who is behind the dismantling and what is their motivation?
Well, I guess you have two things going on. One is what I would call erosion. For example, in the public schools for a very long time, under a variety of names, there's something that used to be called values clarification, in which it is simply a systematic dismantling of the beliefs and values with which children have been raised at home, and trying to replace them with situational ethics and other fads among the intelligentsia. Now, I think most of the teachers who are doing this just imagine that they're doing something new and exciting, and so I don't think they deliberately intend to undermine the country. But what they intend doesn't matter. What the effect is what matters.
Now, what additional changes can you tell us about that have hurt this nation the most? Because this is something that's been going on, as you point out, for quite some time. How did it all begin, and where are we going?
Well, the ultimate beginning of things is very hard, but one of the trends, for example, is the notion that people have rights for which there's no basis in any law, any constitution, or any organized philosophical or religious tradition. But I saw an ad, or rather a photograph just recently of someone sitting on a corner with a sign saying, "I have a right to a job." I have no idea where that right comes from, and it can only be sustained if other people don't have a right to decide who they want to hire.
What role have President Obama, Democrats, and the liberal left played, in your opinion, in circumventing the Constitution?
Oh, I think rushing through three huge bills, huge both in terms of the number of pages, but even more important, huge in terms of the whole sectors of American economic and social life that they're going to change, and rushing those through Congress too fast for the public to even know what's in them, and in fact, too fast for the congressmen who are voting on it to know what's in it. This really destroys the whole notion of a self-governing society that's embodied in the Constitution.
Now, what needs to be done to right the ship? And do you see anyone on the political horizon like Sarah Palin or Newt Gingrich, some candidate you think can put us on the right course?
I don't think any one person can put the country on the right course. I think what needs to be done is to stop the existing administration from going even further in the wrong direction, because there is such a thing as a point of no return. And I suspect that if the administration's majority in both houses of Congress is not either reduced or eliminated, we may well find ourselves unable to change the direction. Although the polls show that the president's popularity is down in the 40% some odd range, if he still has his majority in both houses of Congress, they can, before the next presidential election, make enough illegal aliens legal and get them to vote for Obama, that he will have a second term. And that, I think, will be the point of no return.
Professor, let's talk about the state of the nation's economy. What is your assessment of where we're at right now? And are we headed for another double dip?
I don't do a lot of predicting. I think that most of the mistakes that got us where we are now being repeated and even escalated. For example, the mistake of thinking that politicians in Washington can determine what ought to happen in the housing market. And in particular, the idea that they ought to intervene to make it easier for those people that they want to favor, for whatever reason, to have houses. People who talk about rescuing the housing market seem to act as if the housing market is a living thing. There's no reason why housing prices should be artificially higher than they would be in a free market.
Tim Geithner wants to return mortgage underwriters Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to the quasi-independent status they had before the federal government took them over. How deep is the financial hole at Fannie and Freddie, and what is your recommendation on what should be done about them?
I haven't checked the exact numbers of how deeply they're in right now, but they really are at the heart of the housing boom and bust, because all the artificially lowered lending standards that were imposed on private lenders were viable only because the lenders could lend to people who weren't likely to pay back and then sell the mortgages to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So they're the linchpins of this whole disastrous system. And if they aren't either privatized or better, simply eliminated completely, there's no reason why we can't go through the same cycle again and again.
Now, House Minority Leader John Boehner has called on President Obama to fire Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner and the other remaining members of the president's economic team. What is your reaction to that?
Oh, I think it's a very good suggestion. I think there's no chance whatever that will be done. Geithner certainly may well be fired after the election, but the president is not about to fire any of these people before the election, since that would be an admission of the disasters that they've created.
There's debate over whether President Obama should extend the Bush tax cuts. What happens if we don't renew the Bush tax cuts?
One of the things that will happen is that we'll probably collect lower tax revenues. There's a huge confusion between tax rates and tax revenues. After the Bush tax cuts, which were cuts in tax rates, tax revenues rose, just as tax revenues rose after the Reagan tax cuts in the 80s, after the Kennedy tax cuts in the 60s, and after other tax cuts at other times. So the idea is that we're going to reduce the deficit by eliminating the Bush tax cuts is madness, because all the empirical data indicates that the revenues have gone up after most of these kinds of tax cuts.
What is the inflation risk for the U.S. in your view?
Well, what's remarkable is that we don't already have it. And the reason we don't already have it is that people are sitting on all this money that's being manufactured. Once the money does start to move, whenever that happens, I think the risk of inflation is very substantial.
Is gold price a bubble?
I don't think so, but I don't make predictions and recommendations for others. One of the reasons I think it's not a bubble is that I think inflation is coming. You have not only the record-breaking deficit, on top of that, you have organizations like the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Federal Housing Administration, who have far less money on hand than they're supposed to have for the work that they're doing. It's only a matter of time before they're going to have to come to the government for more money, and that's when the Federal Reserve will have to print more money.
Professor, last question. When can we expect a full recovery?
After this administration is prevented from driving us deeper and deeper into the hole. And I think this fall's election will be sort of a last chance to stop that.
All right, the book is called Dismantling America. Professor Thomas Sowell, congratulations on another fantastic book, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.